Well, a very warm welcome to this episode 10 of the Huddle UK podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. I'm the host, Philip Marsh, as always. And this week, we're going to start our rounds up of the divisions. We're going to go round each week, hopefully get on a representative from all four teams of different divisions to get a sense of how they're feeling, how the off-season's going, what they're looking forward to in the draft, and hopes and dreams for 2025. I don't know why there's an extra 20 involved. We're going to start today with the AFC North, one of my favourite divisions in the NFL. Hopefully a competitive one. It tends to be most years. We're going to start off the episode. We're going to go in reverse order of the teams of how they finished last year. So we're going to go to Browns, then to Bengals, then to Steelers, and wrap it up with the Ravens after they clinched the division last season with a 12-5 record. Just before we get into it, as always, I know you're sick to death of me saying this at the start of every episode, but please go and check out all the online content over at www.huddleuk.com. We've got content going up every day. It's fantastic written work from all of our writers. So no matter which team you support, we have a writer over at Huddle UK that is giving a fan perspective for your team, specific for your team. But branch out, see what the other teams are saying, see how the vibes are across the league. Also, all the videos from these sort of podcasts are up. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. All the videos, the full-length podcast episodes are on YouTube as well. So make sure to go check that out. You can see the fans. There's a nice Welsh flag coming up in this episode as well. Not from myself, for the second week in a row, not the only Welshie on the Huddle UK podcast. So as I said, thank you very much. Please go follow. Please let us know. Give us some feedback. We're all ears for all of it. And if you want to come on the podcast, if you've got some ideas, something you want to hear, something you want to talk about, let us know over on X or on any of the other socials as well. So that's enough of the rambling, enough of the plugging. We're going to start it off. We're going to kick it off with the Cleveland Browns. So as we said, first division up to talk about in this series of episodes is the AFC North. We're going to go in reverse order to how the teams finished last season. Of course, that means we're going to start with the Cleveland Browns. We have Huddle UK writer joining us today to kick off this episode, Oliver George, who's on all social medias at UK Browns NFL. Oliver, it's tough times being a Browns fan. It's not the easiest team to support, is it?
No, you say it's tough times. It seems to always be tough times as a Browns fan, especially during my time as a Browns fan, and for even more so, the guys that are over there doing it for longer all their lives. So, but it doesn't matter how tough it gets, you're still going to support your team. So I think there's no better fan base at doing that than the Browns fans.
We're going to talk about the off-season draft, sort of hopes for next year. We'll start with the big one, the obvious talking point where we have to go to is Myles Garrett. 4-year, $160 million extension after writing a letter saying he was leaving, of course, repping the shirt. Yeah, for those watching on the YouTube channel, honestly, wearing the Myles Garrett shirt. Were you pleased? And obviously pleased to have a player like Myles Garrett come back, but after having written a letter to say, thank you, I'm off, essentially, I want to go win a championship. Sold his soul is a really harsh expression, but is there a part of you as a Browns fan who looks at it and goes, or he's here for the money really now?
To be honest with you, I don't really care either way. Myles Garrett, in my opinion, is a generational player. I believe that he's the best player to play for the Cleveland Browns in the Super Bowl era. Whether he's here for the money or the love of the city, of course, you prefer it to be the love of the city. And whilst, yes, the money obviously helps, 40 million a year being made, the highest non-quarterback ever at the time. Every player wants that title. That obviously plays a part. But, the guy is a part owner at the Cleveland Cavaliers. He clearly has an investment in the city, whether or not it was partly influenced or massively influenced by the money. But at the end of the day, as I said, I don't really care. Having Myles Garrett, committing long term is the best outcome for every party involved, especially for the fans, because we get to carry on watching Myles Garrett every Sunday.
And even though it's been a tough time for the Browns, as you said, having a player like that on defense, any game or sort of any play, it's possible he's a game changer, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the best I've ever seen. That's not me just saying that as a Browns fan. Since I've been watching the NFL, I've not seen a player impact the game. It's not just the sacks. Everyone likes to point to the sacks, but you watch Myles Garrett every single down. If you just don't look at anyone else, just look at Myles Garrett. Look at how much attention he commands. Most offensive coordinators in the league have nightmares about him. Him just being out there, whether or not he could be out there 50% on one leg, and he's more impactful than half of the edge rushers in the NFL just because he's there, and what attention that brings to an opposition's offense.
We'll get back to sort of what impact he can have next season towards the end. But it's not just been Myles Garrett. There's been a few other players either signing extensions or joining the team. Tackle Cornelius Lucas, Devin Bush, the linebacker, Malik Collins on 2-year, $20 million deal. That's one of the better moves that the Browns have made this offseason.
Yeah, really like that. Obviously, when they let go of Dalvin Tomlinson, that was a big indicator that they were going to go and sign, a veteran defensive tackle. They clearly felt confident that they had someone lined up to make the move to release Dalvin. A lot of the talk was Draymond Jones or Hargrave, but this was a kind of sneaky, went under the radar signing that when they did made, at the time everyone thought was a really good decision because you look at the last few years especially, he's a defensive tackle that generates a lot of pressure through the interior, so that's such a valuable asset in the NFL, something that the Browns can always need more of. So yeah, definitely a good kind of underrated, kind of under the radar. Not many people saw it coming, but once it did come, he thought, yeah, that is a great move.
Yeah, seventh amongst all defensive tackles in pass rush win rate last season, 45 pressures. So a really sneaky, really good signing that is, I think, for the Browns. The position which the Browns have been sort of in the turmoil and the drama, like many, many teams in the NFL, is the quarterback. They've just traded for Kenny Pickett, who isn't an elite quarterback. He's not, necessarily going to win you Super Bowls, but he's a serviceable quarterback for sure. Traded away Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a fifth. I think that's quite good business, even if he starts or not. But the question is, will he start?
No, I mean, if he's starting week one, then I will be severely disappointed in the Browns off season and what they've done at quarterback. But I was one of the first to kind of say amongst my friends who are Browns fans that I don't think it's actually as everyone's going to laugh. Oh, it's Kenny Pickett, the former first round pick from the Steelers, that it was a bust. That's now gone to Cleveland. It's kind of a funny situation for any fan, even for a Browns fan or Steelers fan. Everyone's kind of laughing at it. But as you said, a fifth round pick and Dorian Thompson Robinson, who, not to hate on the kid, I got a lot of respect for him as an individual, but I don't think he can play quarterback in the NFL. I've seen enough of him in the limited time, the limited games he has played in, to make a pretty confident decision on that. So to get Kenny Pickett, who, whatever you want to say about him, has starting experience in the NFL. He has a winning record in the NFL. He was the backup on a Super Bowl winning team. He can clearly bring something to that room. But no, obviously, I don't think he'll be starting. But I do think you can do worse than Kenny Pickett as a backup or as a kind of third option at quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, I think as a second choice quarterback, he's a really good option. And I thought he looked impressive. Is that the right word? I thought he looked good when he was, forced in for the Eagles last year when Jalen Hurts got injured. So I think there's a bright, there's still room for improvement there. Only 26 years old as well. So yeah, I think that's, as I say, a fifth, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who, nice kid, but has looked completely out of his depth whenever he's been thrown in to an NFL field. Bless his heart. You say you don't think Kenny Pickett will be starting. Would it be fair to say you don't want Deshaun Watson starting?
That would be very fair to say. Yeah, I hope Deshaun Watson never steps on field in a Cleveland Browns uniform again. I think most fans feel that same way. It's something that everyone's pretty much ready to move on from, especially in the Browns community that I'm involved in. We've been talking about moving on from Deshaun Watson for what feels like over a year now. So all the kind of plans going into this off season, all the ideas that anyone like myself who covers the Cleveland Browns in any capacity, it's been under the assumption that Deshaun Watson won't be the starting quarterback either next year or the last year in his contract the year after. So it's about acquiring a quarterback. That's been the biggest conversation this offseason for the Cleveland Browns. Where did they go to get that quarterback? They got the second overall pick. Do they draft one? Do they go out and try and sign a veteran in free agency? That's kind of been the biggest question. It's not whether or not Deshaun Watson's going to start next year. That's kind of an afterthought now. I think for a lot of Browns fans, they've kind of moved on from that.
When you ever talk about Deshaun Watson, yourself, myself, anyone who's an NFL fan, the off-field antics are the first thing that come to mind. But you can't just put that to one side because it is an important factor. But just looking at his gameplay, if you ignore everything else,
Yeah.
the fall off when he joined the Browns was remarkable, wasn't it? The player who he was for the Texans was one of the best in the league, one of the most exciting players, so hard to, bring down. And he's just looked a shell of himself at Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, strictly talking football. I mean, at the time, it's definitely not the quarterback I wanted. I don't think it's a quarterback many Browns fans wanted at the time. But as you said, when they did acquire him, if you were just looking at it strictly from a football perspective, you've just acquired arguably a top five quarterback in the NFL. The Browns get criticised a lot, of course, for acquiring him, but half the NFL threw their hat into the mix for acquiring as I said, a top five quarterback that usually doesn't become available. And as you said, to go from that, it would be one thing to acquire a guy that's maybe a top 12 quarterback and have this drop off, but a guy that was, as I said, genuinely in the argument for a top five quarterback, to be this bad. I think at the start you could, everyone joked about, you keep blaming it on rust. It could obviously be down to rust at first. He missed 2 years of football. It's obviously going to take time to adjust back into NFL gameplay. But once that became, no longer an excuse, and the game it got worse. And this past year was the worst football I've seen from Deshaun Watson at any time in his career, whether that was a Brown or at Houston as well. So off the field stuff aside, if that wasn't even a thing, I'd still want to be moving on from Deshaun Watson just based on how bad he has been as a quarterback. As you said, he's been truly, truly awful.
Last year was truly awful. I mean, 3-14 says it all, really. As I said, we're going to go through the teams in reverse order. Start with the disappointing side of 2024. Who do you want as the quarterback then next year? I mean, there's a couple of guys in the draft who are expected to go sort of top 10. Cam Ward particularly is expected to go top 5, but the consensus on both of them is like they're okay, they're good. Cam Ward maybe with the bigger upside, but neither of them feel like guys, or the consensus across the league and the NFL and across fans and pundits alike is that these guys are good middling quarterbacks at best. Is that where you want, or would you prefer the Browns to go, or would you prefer them to go out and trade for someone like they have with Pickett, but a quality player?
So of course, your heart would shout you'd want to just draft one of these kids and they come in and be the savior. That's what every NFL fan wants. You want to draft your quarterback and him come in and be an elite quarterback for your franchise. But you got to look at it from a realistic perspective as well. You can't just have the blinders on as a fan and look at it just from that outlook. As you said, these are the top two quarterbacks this year, in my opinion, aren't worthy of the second overall pick. I personally wouldn't draft either of them number 2 overall. So that's obviously the kind of problem. So what are you going to do at quarterback? So the way I've kind of looked is, as I said, from a realistic approach. I never thought I would ever say this, 5 years ago, but for me, it's been Kirk Cousins pretty much all off season. That's the guy that's made the most sense for me, because you bring him in and bring in Kirk Cousins, and whether or not you want to draft a quarterback at 2 or 102, I don't really care. You can bring in Kirk Cousins as a bridge quarterback. I think he would have been the best option. Obviously, recent developments in the last couple of weeks, they brought in Russell Wilson for a visit. As much as I've been calling him washed the last 2 years, purely because I was a little bit salty that he didn't come to the Browns in 2022. That was the quarterback that I wanted that offseason. But that is another guy that, from a realistic perspective, would make sense, similar to a Kirk Cousins as a bridge level quarterback. So that's where I'm at. You're not going to acquire a franchise quarterback in free agency or via trade. No one's going to trade their franchise quarterback. So you have to kind of, for me, find someone that is good enough to win you games, good enough to make you competitive, good enough to give you a reason to tune in every week and watch the team. But someone that can, as I said, be that bridge between what you do at quarterback. And for me, if if it was down to me and I could pick a dream scenario, yeah, I'd probably sign I say dream scenario. Dream scenario from a realistic perspective. I'd probably sign Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson and then draft a Jalen Milroe in the second or third round.
It's an interesting debate, isn't it? And this is a sort of lifelong debate as an NFL fan, because you want the Browns to be a watchable team next year. You want to every Sunday tune in and see them play. But realistically, if you're thinking long term, if you can be a top 3 pick maybe next year, when there's a bit more quality in the quarterback pool supposedly coming through, if you had a bad season this year, to add to all the tools that you can collect in the draft, if you get a Travis Hunter or someone like that this year with the second pick and then draft a franchise quarterback next year, that might be good. Whereas if you get Kirk Cousins in and you go, you get 7, 8 wins, you might not have the chance to draft them next season. So it's a real quandary as an NFL fan constantly, isn't it?
Yeah, and for me, I'm not team tank. I never have been. I'm not. I don't want to. Don't get me wrong. When the Browns were 2-12 at one point last season, then yes, it makes no sense to be competitive in those games. You're out of it already. You're eliminated from the playoffs. But I don't believe in starting a season with the mindset of losing games and trying to get a top 5 pick. That you just if you want to do that, then you're putting your job at risk. And this front office that you could argue is on the hot seat and make a very good case for that argument, is not going to make that risk and essentially punt on another year, just to maybe get a top 5 pick and draft a quarterback next year. But as every NFL fan knows, you can never gamble on a prospect, whether no matter how good they are. Everyone saw Trevor Lawrence, the generational prospect, come in, and it's not worked out as well as they thought. You can't work on that basis in the NFL of putting that much faith into a draft pick, especially not one that's a year ahead, not in the current draft coming up, let alone that one. So yeah, that's just not an ideology I believe in. Yes, of course, winning 7 or 8 games and having the 12th pick sucks, but I'd rather at least go into the season believing that they can be competitive in games than not.
You say you don't want to go into tank it, completely understand that. I don't think anyone would want their team to go in with that mindset from week 1. But what's I guess, the ceiling and the floor expectations for you as a Browns fan?
I mean, I'll probably get laughed at for this, but the ceiling every single year, doesn't matter how bad the previous season was. As soon as the new league year starts, the expectation and the ceiling is the Super Bowl. Because in the end of the day, why else are you playing? That's my view on the NFL, and that's my view on every sport. You know what I mean? You're playing it to win it. You're not playing it to tank, and you're not playing it to do this stuff. So, yes, you can be realistic and say maybe that's a very, very, very out there expectation. But that's just kind of how I view things. I'm going to go into every season with that view. If you want me to, as I said, give be a bit more realistic and say what would I be happy and content with, would be challenging for the playoffs and of course making the playoffs. I think there's plenty of talented players on this roster. They went 3-14 the season just been, but that was the same roster that went 11-6 the year before and made the playoffs with 26% of their salary cap on IR and starting 5 different quarterbacks, and were still able to win 11 games because of the players that were on the roster, and those players are still here. Myles Garrett's still here. Denzel Ward is still here. Jerry Jeudy, you look at how good he was last year. That can add such a vital thing to this offense, having a number 1 wide receiver, something they haven't had in a while. But in terms of the floor, what would I be happy with? I want to see them be competitive. I want to see them challenge for the playoffs and, try and make the playoffs.
Well, we all love optimism here at HuddleUK, and good for you for saying that anything's possible. Oliver, we've run out of time because we want to get all 4 teams into this episode, but thank you very much for joining us. Good luck to the Browns, and I know who your pick is in the Huddle mock draft. I won't say on this episode, but for those of you who don't know, we've got a mock draft ongoing at the moment where all of our writers are giving their predictions. So if you want to see who Oliver has picked at the second pick for the Browns, that'll be published at some point next week, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And as I said right at the start, Oliver is on all social medias. I believe it's all social medias, isn't it?
Yeah,
At
pretty much.
UK
Yeah.
Browns NFL. So go follow him there. Loads of Browns content. If you like it, Browns, if that's your team, or even if not, it's still great content. So go over, follow Oliver, and we're going to be moving on now to the Cincinnati Bengals. So from the Browns to the Bengals, who finished last season 9-8, just missing out on the playoffs after a remarkable season, a season where the offense was as good as any offense I've ever seen, and the defense well, the less said about it, the better. Someone who's far more clued up on the Bengals joins us now. Paul from Bengals UK. It's at HuddleUK over on Twitter. One of the international fans of the year as well. No one can be better placed to talk to us. Paul, thank you very much for joining. You must be delighted with the way this week has gone now with Chase and Higgins re-signed.
Yeah, it's been. Well, you know what? So you mentioned Twitter earlier. You know what social media is like. It's kind of people get very impatient very quickly. So if there's no action after a day or an hour or a minute, they're kind of on Twitter, kind of ready to burn things down. So I'm old enough and ugly enough to know that this is a bit of a marathon, not a sprint. But so I kind of expected something to happen, certainly with Chase. But the Higgins story, and I'm sure we'll come on to Hendrickson in a moment, is a really interesting. If you chart the timeline, it's actually genuinely, objectively quite interesting. But certainly, I expected Chase to get done. They would have been nuts to not get that done. I think there's more of an argument about T, whether it's a good idea or not. I'm obviously delighted because I think he's a genuinely really good player. He's a great guy as well. He's just really funny, chilled guy, really great in the locker room. So it would have been, on a personal level, would have been really, really sad and disappointing to see him leave. So certainly in that respect, and what he also brings to the team, I am happy. Yes, I am. I'm not kind of like ripping my top off and dancing on the table like other people. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But certainly, to answer your question, yeah, of course, man, it's really nice to see the Bengals. The Bengals have this reputation for being a poverty franchise, being cheap. They don't pay their players, which is nonsense, I would say. But in other ways, it's kind of true. So it was nice to see the club, put on a bit of a show and kind of do the things that the majority of the fans kind of wanted, So yeah, it was a good week, man. It was a good week.
Yeah, not poverty anymore. Chase's deal, 106.
Well, we are poverty now, I would imagine, because there's no we've just paid like billions keeping loads of players. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 161 million for Chase, 115 million for Higgins. That cheap label, our HuddleUK Bengals writer Sean Tyler was saying, no more. There's no way you can be called cheap, although the funds are going to be limited. Would Chase be for you the best wide receiver in the league? I guess as a Bengals fan, that's the way you'd lean.
Yeah, I would certainly last year, and I do find these things tend to kind of go up and down season by season, right? It just depends how the team's playing, what kind of quarterback is in. But yeah, I mean, when Chase was drafted, there was a big debate within the Bengals fan base whether we should draft Penei Sewell or draft Jamar Chase. Do we want someone to protect Burrow? Therefore, he could kind of have the time to throw to anyone, really. Uncle Tom Cobley, do you know what I mean? Could play wide receiver and Burrow would find him if he had the time. But do you go for like a playmaker like Chase, who is obviously extraordinary? I didn't realise how good Chase is. Watching him week in, week out, he is one hell of a player. The Bengals are actually really good at drafting wide receivers. You look through the history of the Bengals, and there's been Chad Johnson, AJ Green. From when I first started supporting them in the late 80s, Eddie Brown, Tim McGee, you had Carl Pickens, Darnay Scott, go back further, Isaac Curtis, so on and so forth. So they've always been really good at drafting wide receivers, and we've had some really good ones in our history. Chase, I think, is the best one of the lot. He does things that I've never seen other players do. So yeah, I mean, I think he's worth every penny, to be honest with you. He's a crackerjack player.
He's everything you want in a wide receiver, isn't he? He can win at all three levels of the field: pace, strength, physicality, route running. There's not really any bad mark against him. Although not a bad mark against him, but you sounded a bit more cautious or on the fence about the Higgins deal.
Yeah, Higgins is a really quality player. He's not quite in Chase's league. I think they're kind of trying to badge him as a 1A rather than a wide receiver 2. Do you know what I mean? So, and I agree with that. He is, I think, on a lot of teams in the league, he would be the number one receiver. Got tremendous catch radius, good speed, quality after the catch, more so than you'd think. Great, getting certainly much stronger in contested catching situations. A real red zone weapon. Really good player, but he also misses significant chunks of time through injury. Each of his 3-4 seasons in the league, he's done that. And also, there's the philosophical roster building question. Do you pay 2-star wide receivers and a superstar quarterback? The conventional wisdom would say no. I've really been kind of flip-flopping day by day on this. Is Higgins good value? I mean, I would argue that wide receiver is the easiest in many ways to position to replenish in the draft. There seems to be fantastic wide receivers every single year. So there's that as well. You look at the blueprint that the Chiefs have been using to some success. Let's be honest there. They got rid of Tyreek Hill and just paid their boy Mahomes and their boy Kelsey, and then kind of brought in like Juju and brought in, draft picks and whatnot. So that's the way they did it, and that's the way, and kind of concentrating on the trenches, putting money into the trenches, which we don't do. So there's a bit of nervousness about that. So yeah, but I get it. I do get it. I mean, we are a pass-first offense, right? There's no getting away from that. And if we weren't before, we certainly are now, right? There's no choice in the matter now.
It's going to be the sort of season that doesn't matter how many points you score, we're going to just try and score more. I think the Bengals will be arguably the most entertaining team to watch in the whole NFL next season. But, you talk about how much money there is. And my friend Jake, who's the Buffalo Bills writer for HuddleUK, sent me a message the other day. Joe Burrow is 17% of the cap. Higgins is about 12 and Chase is about 15. So you've got 3 players making up 44% of the cap, which means you've got to get 50 players into the other 56% or so.
Well, there's talk, Hendrickson's going to follow. You've got, the thing is, our front office, I think this is legitimate criticism. They've never been great at manipulating the cap. They've never been, again, you talk about the Chiefs and certainly the Eagles. They're brilliant. Roseman's an absolute genius when it comes to manipulating the cap and signing people when you thought there was no money left, and just a bit of manoeuvring, bit of wheeling and dealing, and kind of restructuring deals and kind of taking money from one pot and putting it into another. And we don't do any of that. Have never done any of that. It is a constant bugbear with Bengals fans about that front office, But they seem to, in this respect, have really. I'm touching wood here, whatever this material is. It's kind of they've had to be clever. They've had to be. You can structure people in the right way. I know it seems like a lot of money, and it is, but as long as they can structure the deal in a cap-friendly way, then why not? Why you should pay your best players, I think, to stay. The pressure that the Bengals will face now is that putting all this resource into say 4 players, because we're going to talk about Burrow already, so we're talking about Chase, talking about Higgins, and now we're talking about Hendrickson all being well. There's another. That's a fascinating situation as well. I talk about T. Higgins. The saga with T. Higgins. They should have really paid him a couple of years ago. They would have saved $5 million or whatever, but the Bengals dragged their heels. It looked as though we weren't going to get the deal done because his agent was David Muligueta, and we've had previous bad experiences of trying to get a deal with him. He's the absolute, don of agents, the hardest kind of person to get a deal with, I think. But then he changed agents. So again, that's a hell of a story. And the Hendrickson story as well is really, really interesting. There's a lot of double bluff. We don't quite know what's going on behind closed doors, but the noise is at the moment that it's hopeful that he'll re-sign with Cincinnati. And again, you can turn and fro with him as well. Do you pay a 30-year-old pass rusher like $30 million plus a year? Do you do that? Should you do that? You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's really interesting. It's been a really lively off season, and then we still need a starting guard or 2. So this roster is very much still work in progress. But yeah, it's been a fun week.
Hendrickson's stats sort of speak for themselves. 80 games played, 70 sacks, 70 tackles for loss, 137 quarterback hits. One of the best, 30 years old, but probably he would argue worth his weight in gold when it comes to the new contract.
But you look at the stats though, Phil, and a lot of pass rushers hits 30 and they go off a cliff quite quickly. So again, you have to make a decision as a front office. Now, you're absolutely right. You look at the stats, the 4 years that he's been in Cincinnati, he's been the Bengals' best ever free agent signing. Best ever. I don't think there's actually any question about that. He's been absolutely brilliant, and an Pro Bowl every year, NFL sack leader. So the conventional wisdom would be, why the hell would you let this guy walk? He's like one of the NFL's best. But then you do have to weigh it up with if you look at 30-year-old, 30-plus pass rushers. But I do think that's going to get done, only because there's no one else on defense that does what he does for us. Like you mentioned, our defense was so bad last year. He was just one of the few shining lights. Now, the hope is that our new defensive coordinator, Al Golden, will work his magic and really develop some of the younger guys that we've got on there that are showing some promise. As I say, the scary thing for Bengals fans is that we're putting the trust into the front office to draft well, which they haven't done in the past 3-4 years. So that's going to be really, really interesting. For this strategy of paying like 3-4 people loads of money, like you say, like about 50% of the cap or whatever it was, you have to draft really well, and there's nervousness about that.
Sean, as I said, the Bengals writer for us here at HuddleUK, he sent me his Bengals mock draft first round pick the other day. I won't say who that is, but who would your preference be? Who would you like to see the Bengals go for with a 7?
Oh goodness! Actually, we're at 17, so we're actually not sitting in a bad place. The Bengals have been pretty good at sticking to best player available, but I think need and best player available kind of converge this year, and we're sitting in a nice place to tick both of those boxes actually. So I think, James, so we're going to be looking for a pass rusher. I think we could do with some interior defensive pass rush. So there's a lot of chatter about Walter Nolan, but I think he might go bit later than 17. I think Derek Harmon might be a really good shout. I think some of the defensive end like Pierce or Green or Stewart might be there. So, but certainly defensive. But then you've got a few wild cards. There might some cornerbacks, some really good cornerbacks might fall to us at that stage, and cornerback is a really prized position. But yeah, overall, I think I'm going to go. I think Pierce might have gone. I'll go Harmon.
Okay, well, I won't tell you who Sean went for, but he was one of the names you listed. I will at least say that.
Very
so
good.
you're on the same page, at least with the short list of players who he's gone for. Just before you go, as we said, the offense is going to be brilliant. The defense is going to be question marks about it. I saw a tweet that said after they signed Higgins and Chase, saying the Bengals are about to have the first ever 33rd ranked defense in the NFL. It's not going to be that bad, particularly if they get someone like Hendrickson back. But can you realistically, as a Bengals fan, or can the Bengals realistically have Super Bowl ambitions at the moment when the defense has got so many question marks surrounding it?
I mean, yes. I think you always have to aim for the Super Bowl, especially if you've got players like Burrow, and they genuinely are very special players, Burrow and Chase. Now we've re-signed Mike Gesicki, Higgins is back in the fold, Chase Brown is a real threat, as I mentioned. Brown and Mims on the outside there of the line are pretty good. We've got to sort the guards out. I think we've got an offense that can beat anyone. I really do. But we need to, sort the trenches out, sort the defense. I mean, Jermaine Pratt will be off as well, so linebacker. We need. The short answer is yes, but obviously everything is a bit more nuanced than that. Do you know what I mean? I'd like to think they will show strides, because the theory is, and I'm not sure I subscribe to this, is that even if they can sort out and become a middling defense, that will be enough. Because you look at the games that we lost last year, so many of them were by a single score, right? So if we'd have got one stop or a turnover or whatever, or in several, just one of those games, actually, we would have made the playoffs. And I think so. Yeah, I personally would like to see um, the trenches really kind of beefed up this year. We've signed TJ Nolan, by the way, from Green Bay, who's a run stuffing, a decent run stuffing nose tackle. So that should really help because we never really replaced DJ Reader when he was a great player for us. But yeah, so again, short answer, of course, yeah, I think everyone aims for the players in the Super Bowl. I think we've got the offensive players to do that. If the defense can get to sort of mid-table in stats wise and in points scored, then yeah, I think there's a chance. But there's a lot of moving parts still on that defense. We're trusting Al Golden to work a miracle, so it might not happen in this first year. Do you know what I mean? And we might have to be patient and go for the next year. But the window's still open. I think we've just got to kind of kick it a bit wider open this year. So we'll see. It's going to be fun. Like you say, I think at the very least will be a really fun team to watch. There will be points scored in Bengals games this year, I think. So,
Paul, thank you very much for joining us. We do really appreciate it. As I mentioned right at the top of this, Paul's Bengals UK is one of the most followed, I believe, Twitter pages of the UK fan bases for the NFL teams. It's at @whoday_UK. And am I right in saying, because we spoke to Scott Hartley, who's the Commanders International Fan of the Year, are you going to be making a pick yourself, potentially?
I've not been told yet. I'm apparently I'm going over, so it would be kind of be rude not to get on stage and. I really want to kind of subvert the whole process. That's just me. I want to tell some bad jokes and kind of insult Steelers fans, but I doubt if they'll let me do that, to be honest with you. But yeah, who knows what's going to happen? I'm open to everything. It's just a bit of a wild, surreal kind of thing to the prospect of walking onto a stage where there's going to be millions of people watching, slightly nerve-wracking, but yeah, got it. It's once in a lifetime stuff in it, so you've got to have a crack at it. Really looking forward to the experience, I think.
Yeah, well, very much you should be as well, and enjoy it. We're going to move on from Bengals now to the team that was second last year, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Ooh.
So 2 down, 2 to go. We've done the Browns, we've done the Bengals. We've just realised off air that we're ticking off the home nations as we go as well. We're in from Wales to England, and now we're going north of Hadrian's Wall. We're up to Scotland to do the Pittsburgh Steelers chat. Here with HuddleUK Steelers writer John Cruickshank. John, last year, it's always the same with the Steelers. It feels an above 500 season, get to the playoffs, bit disappointing. Do you see that changing going forward?
First of all, forgive me for the thick accent, but I think this is a promising season for the Steelers. This is the first time in a long time that it feels like there's going to be some real change throughout the team. Like it's very much been kind of incremental changes season to season. This season could be lots of change, obviously, with the quarterback situation, the playmaker situation, and just the kind of DNA of the team seems like it could be in a little bit of flux just now. Now, whether that's good or bad is to be determined. Obviously, Mike Tomlin, I think, gives us such a high floor, season in, season out. His resistance to change isn't always a good thing in terms of we've seen that there's been a bit of stagnation. I think he's the right man for the job, but it does cause difficulties with things like that. A lot of it does come down to the quarterback situation, obviously, which just now, who knows? Who knows? It seems like they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers making a decision. But out with that, it could be scary times. Mason Rudolph's the only quarterback that's signed. Russell Wilson, for anybody that was reading my articles on the Huddle last year, will know I'm not a fan of his. I don't think he gave the Steelers much of a chance to perform. He seemed to be making things harder game in, game out, which you just can't move forward successful in the NFL, especially when it comes to playoffs and you have to take on elite teams. I just don't think he had it in him to make it play in, play out. So we'll see what happens in regards to that. And that's where the draft comes in, obviously. There is talk that Shedeur Sanders could be sliding. If he doesn't does get past the New York teams, there doesn't see an obvious landing spot, which is where it could be down to Pittsburgh. At that point, it could be a new lease of life on us, but we'll see what happens. It's tough to answer. Obviously, it's tricky just now with everything with the layout. There's still so much to fall. I think Pittsburgh's the one team left in the off-season who really still have big dominoes to fall, which makes it hard to try and judge where they're going to go moving forward.
We'll circle around to the quarterbacks as well, because obviously that's a big talking point in Pittsburgh. But DK Metcalf was your latest story for Huddle UK. It's the biggest signing. It's the marquee name for the Steelers. It just makes me laugh at the amount of meetings I've seen of DK and George Pickens. It's just going to be go routes, isn't it? It's just get the ball, run, so they're down there somewhere. It feels like not carbon copies of each other. They do have their own nuances and their own aspects of individuality, but quite similar players. At least it'll make it entertaining to watch.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I would not want to try and play press coverage against them. The two of them are massive, massive. And then the fastest receiver at the lot of them is Calvin Austin, who's going to be going deep as well. So it really could be go route central for Pittsburgh, kind of harkening back to Terry Bradshaw and Lynn Swann and things like that. I think the biggest thing about Metcalf, is just such a force multiplier. Like, instead of George Pickens all of a sudden being our only hope in a lot of ways, DK now becomes the true number one receiver. George Pickens suddenly becomes like a top 2 or maybe top 5 number 2 receiver in the league, which is just so good. Like, he showed that he could cope against number 1 cornerbacks in the league, and now he's going to, in theory, have an easier matchup game in and game out. So I think that's where DK Metcalf could have an even bigger impact on that, not just his actual stats come the end of the game. It's that kind of false multiplier effect it has on the other pass catchers. And all of a sudden, what was maybe the worst pass catching group in the league is now mid, which obviously not great, but it certainly is a big step up from what it was. And I think if used correctly, it could be much, much better. I don't think Calvin Austin was used to his strengths last year. Pat Fairmouth didn't get anywhere near the amount of targets that he should have, considering he had some good games. And Darnell Washington, I know he is still a kind of work in progress, but wow, another massive guy who could be utilised so well. And in actual fact, the tight end room's really, really good. So they've got Connor Hayward and Donald Parham from your Chargers, who looked really good whenever I seen him. It just seemed to ball out, make some big catches. I think if used correctly, which Arthur Smith certainly did in Tennessee, then the pass catching room could be a kind of sneaky underrated group this year.
Those tight ends, Dana Washington and Donald Parham, are two of the biggest players in the league. If they're ever on the same snap, it's just going to be the biggest line I've ever seen. I mean, hilarious. It's going to be great watch. Just put those two guys on either side of the offensive line, let DK and Pickens go crazy, and yeah,
Crazy.
that's a recipe for success. Do you think having DK there now is more? I know you're not a Russell Wilson fan, but are you more lenient or more open to the idea of having Russell Wilson come back for next year, given that he already has that chemistry, that past relationship with DK Metcalf at the Seahawks?
Definitely would help Russell, obviously. Like, although I'm not a fan of Russell Wilson, the one thing which he still is one of the best in the league at is that deep ball. Moon balls, the way it's described sometimes, are kind of dropping into the bucket, and it just describes his deep ball perfectly. It's not like a thrown ball on a rope the way it is with kind of Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. It is thrown into the bucket. It just sums it up perfectly, and he is still so good at it. It's the one thing that he really did bring to the Steelers last year. All of a sudden, when he took over from Justin Fields, the average yards per play went up on passing routes and stuff like that. It did make a big impact in regards to that.
You mentioned the name Aaron Rodgers. Is that a name that you'd like to see join the Steelers?
Personally, yeah, I think I'm one of the lone people that is. Angry and annoyed Aaron Rodgers has proven to be a very effective Aaron Rodgers in this league over the past few years, even dating back to his last year in Green Bay, I think it was, or the year after Jordan Love was drafted, sorry. He just went out on like an FU tour, essentially, and won the MVP that year. he certainly would need a bit more help than he has been getting for the Jets and stuff like that. But I think Pittsburgh are actually in a unique position to be able to help him with that. He wouldn't necessarily be my dream pick at the start of the off-season, but considering how it's worked out, I think I probably would take him. It also just relieves a bit of pressure this year, because if it's not him, then you're going to be kind of wasting a year of like TJ Watt's prime, of Cam Hayward's prime. Well, I suppose it is Cam Hayward's prime, actually. The man just never ages. But it would be wasting a year of those guys. And I don't think Pittsburgh can afford to do it, to be honest with you. So I think Aaron Rodgers, there's maybe a 10-15% chance that he rings everything together and can play at an MVP level again. I don't think there's anyone else that Pittsburgh can get who has that ceiling, potentially.
That's a good argument for him. Certainly a good argument. But I thought you were going to say no. So you half changed my mind there. You mentioned the wide receivers and the tight ends. We've touched on the quarterbacks, but the running back room is the room you haven't mentioned at all. You've lost Mr. 3 yards of carry to us, Najee Harris, who I think is one of my most sort of all the off-season signings. He just makes perfect sense. Harbaugh, trench ball, and Najee Harris just running for, a max 4 yards of carry. So it just seems to be the right fit, because he just doesn't ever go down, does he? He's just a wrecking ball. So I'm kind of interested to see how that works out for the Chargers, but we'll get into the Chargers in the AFC West episode. Is it Kenneth Gainwell, I think, has signed for the Steelers?
He's signed.
Is Jalen Warren still there as well?
Yeah.
Neither of those players make you light up with excitement.
Used in the right situations, yeah, I think so, but that's key. Kenneth Gainwell looked great for the Eagles, but he was used situationally, and he was spelling backs over the past couple of years. The issue, I think, with having the two of them in the same room is two of them are 5'8". Although they are muscular, 5'8", that's just not going to cope over the course of the league season if it's just those two. Certainly room for a bigger back, maybe with a mid to late round draft pick, or with the exception if a certain Mr. Ashton Jante is there come 21, which you never know with running backs. Like in the past couple of years, you just don't know how far they're going to fall. And he coming out, it looks as good as anyone has, essentially, since like Adrian Peterson in the draft. I don't think there's anybody who could say looked markedly better than him in college, with it going back to Adrian Peterson, really. I don't imagine Omar Khan's going to go ahead and get Jante, whether it makes sense or not. And I'm also, while you point out, I'm devastated Najee Harris left. I think he is the most underrated running back in the league. So good at everything, but he was just used to run into a massive pile of bodies. But he is so good at everything. I think used correctly, he will be a massive weapon for San Diego. Not San Diego. Wow.
They were San Diego when I started following them, so that's absolutely fine. I picked them because they were in San Diego, so we now call them the LA Chargers, but in my heart they're still the San Diego Chargers. That's absolutely fine. Looking at last year, you finished 10-7, as I said at the top, a pretty standard Steelers season. What's the ceiling and the floor for the Steelers in 2025?
So typically the floor would be 500. Well, above 500 considering it's Mike Tomlin. But I think this year it actually might not be the case, depending on what happens with quarterback. I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing, though, because let's just say one season to bottom out and get a high draft pick and take a good quarterback. That's not the worst case scenario. It would be a shame, as I said, to have wasted a year of some of those really good defenders' primes. But in all likelihood, it probably will be something similar, 10-7. Look good at points in the season, and then come playoff time, as much as I hate to say it, when it comes to against the elite teams, will probably struggle. They just have too many holes. The one part in the draft, just to mention, which I actually think the way the Steelers are going to end up going is D-line. They were really struggling come the end of last year to keep offenses into third and long. A lot of that was down to the running defense, which started really good, but then just faded as the year went on. There is some potential good defensive tackles this year. In the draft, Mason Graham as the number one defensive tackle. We won't be able to get a hold of him, but anybody after him probably is in play. There's a guy from Michigan, Kenneth Grant, 6'4", 331 pounds, and he has an absolute mountain, as I'm sure you can imagine. He would be a stereotypical nose tackle, which is what Pittsburgh could really do with. The only issue with that is it means you're maybe drafting a 2-down player, but it would mean that you can use Cameron Hayward and Keanu Benton at defensive end. It means you can get the likes of Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, Nick Herbig and stuff like that just free to rush the passer if you can keep these offenses in third and long or third and manageable at least. So I think that's the way Pittsburgh's going to go, and I think it's a kind of sneaky big hole that the defense, or the Steelers in general, have.
Yeah, Kenneth Grant was one of the players that I wrote about in my most recent Chargers story for the HuddleUK website, because he's one of 3 Michigan players who keeps getting sort of linked with being reunited with Jim Harbaugh, and not someone I'd be against. I think it'd be great. Also, at the time of this recording, the HuddleUK mock draft is at pick 19. So all the players you mentioned, with the exception of Ashton Junty and, of course, Mason Graham, they're still on the board. So you'll be up picking soon at pick 21. Won't give away any spoilers. You know, you've already given us some names that you might want to be taking there, but we'll see where you get to. We'll see who's still on the board when the next 2 players are taken off it by the Bucks and the Broncos writers for the HuddleUK website. Are you, just to finish things off, do you think it's a happy place at the moment? As in, do you think, is it positive mainly? You seem quite positive and cheery about what the future holds, or the immediate future at least. But is that the vibe, do you think, among the Steelers community? You said you sort of stay out on your own when it comes to the Rodgers situation.
No, I don't think this is the first year that I've sensed some real frustration stateside. I was looking online and certainly in the UK with Mike Tomlin. It was starting to grow last year. The season before with Matt Canada and stuff like that as offensive coordinator. But this year there seems to be a real downbeat feeling from a lot of people. The owner's comments and things like that didn't help. In regards to that, I think probably helped that fans felt that the owner was listening to them, but at the same time, maybe didn't help Mike Tomlin and some of the coaching staff. I think that's another reason why they might be going all out for Aaron Rodgers, or perhaps if Shedeur Sanders or somebody was to slide, why they might be looking at that. But this is definitely the most downbeat since I've been a Steelers fan, which has been since 2007. So, in a long time, really. There's always been something for Steelers fans to be able to hang their hat on, even in Big Ben's last days. He was putting up numbers. The defence looked really good, and while we would kind of end up getting beat come playoff time, there's certainly things you could hang your hat on. Whereas coming at the tail end of last year, the defence was falling apart. The offence was, oh God, that just sums it up really, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think that for Mike Tomlin's sake, they need to pull something out the hat, so to speak. I don't think he should go. I think you look at some teams who've get rid of a coach and then they've just absolutely failed for so long. Chicago with Lovie Smith. It draws a lot of parallels, to be honest, because Lovie Smith kept Chicago at kind of 500 or thereabouts, and since he left, they've been hideous. Obviously, Cincinnati under Marvin Lewis as well had a period they were a bit up and down. Obviously, since Joe Burrows came, they've certainly looked a lot better. But I just think it would be so easy for Pittsburgh to think, oh, I tell you what, we'll try and mix things up, and then instantly regret it. And I just think it would be such a foolish decision.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what 2025 brings for Mike Tomlin and the Steelers. I think he probably has to get a playoff win this year. I think that's sort of minimum requirement, because he is kind of in the hot seat, and if he doesn't get if he doesn't get that playoff win this year, I think that could be 2025 could be the last one for Tomlin. John, thank you very much for taking some time out. And this is Thursday's recording. This was thank you very much for taking time. I know Scotland are currently in action, aren't they? In the World qualification, they're winning. They're currently beating Greece, so you know that's a winner. So I'll let you get back and enjoy the second half of that, and we'll round up this episode with the Baltimore Ravens. Well, we've had a very last-minute late call-up from the practice squad, as the analogy has just been made to me. We were going to be speaking to our HuddleUK writer, Adam, but unfortunately, Adam has some emergency he has to attend to. So we've got a call-up, but hopefully as good as the real thing itself. We're joined by Richard Jones, who is a Ravens fan from Chepstow, the Welshman, joining the huddle today. Richard, how long have you been a Ravens fan?
Yeah, so I sort of first started watching around 2011, 2012, but I didn't necessarily appreciate what was going on. The twilight of Ray Lewis's career, the Super Bowl run. I'd say I've probably been much more aware since around 2014, so a decent length of time now.
You've followed them during a good period as well. I know, that Super Bowl you touched upon, I'm assuming is the 49ers one.
Yeah, it was the one where there was a big power cut and they had to postpone the game, and the 49ers very nearly came all of the way back.
I remember watching that on TV. It's one of the first ones I remember watching with a group of the boys. I think I was around 19, 20 at that point. One of them was a big Ravens fan, so he was happy that day. I'm sure you were as well. Wanted to get onto the off-season, have a bit of a chat with you about sort of what the look ahead for 2025 is. The biggest moves this off-season so far have been Ronnie Stanley and DeAndre Hopkins. Let's start with Hopkins. Needed some more depth at wide receiver. He's a bit, he's past his glory years, let's say, but still showed flashes for the Chiefs last season of the player he can be. Are you pleased? He's the sort of player you're happy that they signed?
Yeah, well, I mean, the AFC North's been an arms race at wide receiver, and obviously we've seen Chase and Higgins, Judy at the Browns, the Steelers making a big move for Metcalf. I think the Ravens pair that they had in Flowers and Bateman are very underrated. I think they are up there, but they're not necessarily the big names of the other teams. So Hopkins is a guy that the Ravens have coveted now for a number of years. There's certainly been lots of smoke, and his name has been talked about, but they've never quite got that deal done. So yeah, I think it's an exciting move. I think certainly an upgrade on Aguilar, who was the guy in that kind of wide receiver 3 position as the vet. And, they tried to make that move. So they signed Odell Beckham, and that didn't necessarily work out. The money was too much, what he was able to provide. Whereas I think $5 million for Hopkins is quite the bargain. And Hopkins has talked about potentially leaving money on the table for a chance to play with Lamar.
I mean, anyone in their right mind would want to play with Lamar, wouldn't he? He is supported. I'm just quickly on those wide receivers. I'm still a Rashad Bateman truther. I don't know about yourself. You said they're slightly underrated. I still believe in the talent there. We'll see if that's a foolish thing to say or not. But
Look, I think he more or less had the best year of his career. He's signed for the next couple of seasons on a very cheap deal. There was essentially his agent messed up, and it cost him a year of eligibility, and EDC was able to sweep in on an excellent below market value deal. So I think the wide receiver room is set up really, really well for next season.
yeah, absolutely, completely agree. The other name I mentioned at the top there, Ronnie Stanley, of course, bit of a hero at the Ravens, the 2-time Pro Bowl left tackle. I think he said after re-signing that he was the Ravens were the only team, sorry, he was happy to take less money to play for. It's a 3-year deal, 60 million is no, small change, but a player that you think's worth that money?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely crucial, and there's not a Ravens fan that I've spoken to that disagrees with that. I think it's an interesting year. I think Ronnie Stanley, probably the most talented left tackle on the free agency market, but obviously with some injury concerns, he suffered like a horrible kind of ankle injury and lost pretty much 2 seasons as a result. But last year he was healthy, played a whole season. It's hard to replace those guys in the draft. I mean, lots of the tackles project better as guards, and down the bottom end of the draft, you're not getting a stud left tackle in the first round anyway. So yeah, it would have been a real problem for the Ravens had Ronnie Stanley not resigned, and he did. He's done the team an amazing turn because 20 million a year's no chump change. If the reports are to be believed, a team like the Patriots was willing to get into the $24-25 million market, and I Stanley is he's a high caliber cerebral guy. He's made his life in Baltimore. I think he's been through good times with the team. He's been through tough times with the team, and I think that he's really shown that loyalty by accepting that deal, not even making it to the start of free agency and receiving those larger offers.
It's always nice when those sort of talismans for the team, wherever they play across the field, re-sign it. I think it shows the confidence in the team as well, that he believes that the Ravens season, was a bit shorter. I think most Ravens fans were hoping it would have lasted a few more weeks in the playoffs back in January. It wasn't to be, of course, with the game against the Bills, but I think it's a great move for the Ravens. You used the word concerns in that last answer, though. I guess the biggest concerns for the Ravens right now is on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think we're definitely short a cornerback at the moment. So Brandon Stevens had a mixed year. A player that I personally really like, but did receive a fair amount of criticism, but segued that into a decent contract with the Jets. So last year's first round pick Nate Wiggins is hopefully going to slot right into that second starting safety to cornerback position. Marlon Humphrey was back to his kind of like all-pro caliber best, but I think there's not a lot of depth behind those two, and I mentioned the wide receiver race in the AFC North. You've got to be able to stop those deadly duos that are going to be playing you 6 times a year.
He won the division, obviously, the Ravens last year, 12 wins, 5 losses. It wasn't the perfect season by any stretch of the imagination. Do you think the 12-5 mark is a mark that they'll be aiming to hit again in 2025, or do you think that's sort of the floor that they'll be trying to exceed?
Well, I do think that the Ravens are a team that could achieve 12-5. I think the AFC North is, you're always in a dogfight for the AFC North. Obviously, Cincinnati have really bolstered, or they've certainly made moves to solidify that offense. I think the Steelers currently don't have a quarterback, but you can never count them out. The Browns continue to be the Browns, but obviously when you win a division, you get an absolutely brutal schedule the next year, and our schedule is horrendous. So can we make it to 12-5? I don't know, but yeah, there's no reason not to. I don't think this is a Ravens team that is worse than it was the previous 2 seasons.
It's a bit of a cliche, I know, but when you've got a superstar quarterback like Lamar Jackson, you have to be aiming for the Super Bowl. There's no 2 ways about it.
Yeah, and that's sort of been the enduring the trauma since 2019, really. Like, I think you could argue that in a different universe, the Ravens have 3 Super Bowls since 2019, but they've never been able to get over the line. And we saw that again this year. That Bills game was really there for the taking, and they basically made loads of silly errors and allowed the Bills to get a lead, and the Bills were able to play mistake-free football, where I think the Ravens, there was an interception, there was a fumble. So look, as a Ravens fan, I think certainly in the Lamar era, you go into every season knowing that you could be in the Super Bowl, but we just haven't quite managed it yet.
A nice place to be, though, isn't it? Because there's most teams, I'd argue, around the league that don't have that confidence. I know it's not nice when you get knocked out when you have that high of confidence, but it's nice when you go in and you're sitting here in the off season. There's places that need to be fixed. There's some gaps on the roster, but you look at Lamar and you think we could do it. On their day they can beat anyone. The Ravens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fantastic position to be in. Obviously you want that hope going into a season, whereas I think fans of some teams go into a season hoping that they're going to get a top 5 draft pick, and that doesn't strike me as too much fun.
No, absolutely. Speaking of the draft, are there any players any rookies? I'm not sure if you're a fan of college football, or if you watch it particularly yourself. The Ravens down with pick 27 in the first round this year, as things stand anyway at the time of the recording. That can always change. But are there any rookies that you've watched or liked that you're hoping that the Ravens take a punt on this year?
Look, I'm actually not a huge college guy. Well, the Ravens mantra used to be, in Aussie we trust. Now it's in EDC we trust. I'm the type of fan where I'm not going to throw my opinions around on certain players too much because I don't know. I don't have access to the interviews, the data, and I just think, well, the people that are paid millions to do that job will do a much better job than me. So, speaking of, I think there are a number of positions that the Ravens could really do with. One of which being edge. I think we're in a position at edge where OA is coming to the last year of his contract as it stands. Is he the sort of player that you want to pay long term? Well, I'm not quite sure his production warrants that. Ajabo's, really nice story, but it's never quite worked out for him in the NFL. Kyle Van Noy keeps producing at an incredible rate, that he's a year older and, can he do it again? So I think an edge would be really lovely. Spoken about a cornerback possibly to bolster that room. I think on offense, if you're being realistic, then possibly a guard would be the thing that I'd say. Well, if you were gonna spend a first round pick late in the first round, a really good guard on that, it would be a top 3 offensive line unit in the NFL. I think we've got 2 young guards in place at the moment, and they are definitely the weak link on the line. So those would be the 3 positions that I would look out for. But knowing the Ravens, we'll probably end up drafting a safety.
Well, there's lots of offensive guards in particular who might be at that point. Tyler Booker's the one that comes to mind out of Alabama. That would seem like a nice fit for the Ravens, but you never know. As you say, people are paid far more money than we are to make these decisions for their teams. Just before we go, we'll wrap it up. Just a prediction from yourself, very early, way too early prediction for where the Ravens will get to in 2025.
You know what? We've been knocking on the door, so Super Bowl winners.
I love that. Confidence. This is what we want to hear here at HuddleUK. I love it. Bit of confidence. Brilliant. Richard, thank you very much, as I said, for stepping up last minute. Do appreciate you taking the time on this. It's late on a Thursday evening, so a big thank you to Richard, and good luck to the Ravens this year. Big thank you to all 4 of our guests, Oliver and John, as we said, the HuddleUK writers for the Browns and the Steelers. Really, thank you very much to Paul for jumping on from Bengals UK. Really good to chat to him. And the last minute call up Richard as well. It was a bit of a shock to the system there late during this recording, but a real big help. And so thank you very much to Richard for being part of the huddle, being part of this episode, the first of our divisional roundups. AFC North is now ticked off. We'll be getting through all the other 7. If you'd like to be part of them, as I said right at the top of this episode, if you want to be a part, if you've got any questions about the divisions, what your team, about what players, free agency, draft, anything, let us know over on social media. We're at Join the Huddle on pretty much everything. The website itself, www.huddleuk.com. Nothing more to add from me. Thank you very, very much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed. Give us a rating. Thank you very much. And we'll catch you next week on the Huddle UK podcast.